An American pilot received an order. He flew to his target. He confirmed what he was looking at. And then he dropped his bombs. And the people he killed were survivors, clinging to lifeboats in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And here's the thing, he followed every order correctly. He hit his target precisely. He was awarded a medal when he landed. And because of what he did that afternoon, a German admiral at Nuremberg walked free. September 12, 1942. The RMS Laconia is cutting through the South Atlantic, roughly 290 miles northeast of Ascension Island. She's a converted Cunard ocean liner, the kind of ship that, before the war, took wealthy passengers around the world in 130 days. Now she's a troop ship, and she's carrying 2,732 people. I'm talking about 286 British soldiers, 87 civilian women and children, 103 Polish guards, 463 crew, and 1,809 Italian prisoners of war, captured in North Africa and locked in the cargo holds below the waterline. At 10:22 p.m., U-156 fires 2 torpedoes. You see, to German Captain Werner Hartenstein, the Laconia looked like exactly what she was, an armed British troop ship, a legitimate military target. He hit her, and she began to sink. And that's when U-156 surfaced. And what Hartenstein heard, in the darkness, in the water all around him, were voices. Italian voices. His allies. And they were screaming. Another factor was what Hartenstein did next, because he didn't dive, and he didn't leave.
You heard the throb of the engine, and there it comes into view.
It was the conning tower of a submarine.
The conning tower opens, and they go to the machine gun on the bow.
We thought, well, you know, here we are, we've survived this far, now we're going to be a machine gun.
And it came alongside, and the captain came out with a megaphone, and in perfect English, he said, you are survivors from the Laconia? We said yes. And he said, I want all the women and children to come aboard my ship. And some of the men were a bit loath to let us go, naturally. So he reassured them, and he said, please don't worry. They will be perfectly safe.
I remember him very well, but I would be hard put to describe him. He was wearing a tattered cap, I remember, that was white.
A bit of a ginger beard.
I thought that he seemed quite a small man.
He was the one who sank us, he told us. And the crew were very, very young. Their average age was 19 or 20, and Hartenstein was 32. They then started to give us water and soup, but then we got back in the boat. But of course, all those people who were badly injured couldn't come out of the boat, and he gave water, he sent water to them. I mean, I thought, what is he doing here? Giving us water, which they must have had a shortage of anyway, and endangering his boat. I mean, this wasn't the normal U-boat captain, who certainly wouldn't have bothered about survivors.
We were the first boat that he rounded up, the very first. Because we were the first, we were taken below. They gave us a good meal, and then they told us to get to lie on the bunks. Now, to a 15-year-old girl with a brother 4.5 years younger, it was wonderful.
It must have been unknown for an English sailor in the middle of the South Atlantic to go on board a U-boat. I mean, you know, it's crazy.
Within hours, U-156 had nearly 200 survivors packed onto and inside a submarine which was designed for 53 men. 5 women were placed in the officers' sleeping quarters. 4 lifeboats, each packed with survivors, were tied to the hull and towed behind.
But then you have the feeling, let's hope nobody depth charges the submarine, because we'd be worse off, we'd be down below.
I stayed on the deck and talked to him, and he stayed more or less in the conning tower. I suppose that was his duty in case he had to do an emergency dive.
His crew improvised a Red Cross flag, made from a white bedsheet with a painted red cross. And then Hartenstein did something extraordinary. He broadcast a message in English on open radio channels to everyone, including the Allies. His message was simple. If any ship will assist the shipwrecked Laconia crew, I will not attack her, providing I am not being attacked by ship or air force. I picked up 193 men. He gave his exact coordinates, then he waited. The British in Freetown intercepted the message. They didn't believe it. They assumed it was a trap. But Admiral Dönitz approved the rescue. He pulled 7 U-boats from a planned surprise attack on Cape Town and redirected them to the Laconia site. 3 more submarines arrived: the U-506, the U-507, and an Italian submarine. Together, they were towing hundreds of survivors towards Vichy France warships. I mean, let's look at that for a moment. You're talking about 4 enemy submarines, coordinating a rescue in the middle of a war, carrying the flag of the Red Cross, and waiting for Allied ships to come and take their survivors. Survivors who were British, Polish, Italian, and some definitely civilian. For 3.5 days, the rescue held. And then a B-24 appeared. September 16th, 11:25 in the morning. Lieutenant James Harden is flying a B-24 Liberator out of a secret American airbase on Ascension Island. He spots U-156 on the surface. The submarine's deck is crowded with survivors. The Red Cross flag clearly visible. 4 lifeboats trailing behind. Harden circles his B-24 for 30 minutes. And during that time, Hartenstein's crew sends repeated Morse code requests for assistance. A British Royal Air Force officer on board the sub, a survivor, gets on the radio himself. He transmits directly to the aircraft. RAF officer speaking from German submarine. Laconia survivors on board. Soldiers, civilians, women, children. Harden breaks off from the U-156 and reports what he saw back to base. The senior officer on duty that day was Captain Robert C. Richardson III. And Richardson gave one order: sink the sub. Richardson later said he didn't know about the radio messages. He believed, incorrectly, that submarines couldn't legally fly Red Cross flags in combat zones. He was worried the U-boat might discover the secret fuel tanks on Ascension Island. He then assumed the Germans were only rescuing the Italian POWs, not British or civilian survivors. Richardson was wrong about all of it. But because Harden received that order, he flew back out over the Atlantic.
Now there was some cloud at the time, and we heard a plane come over. It was an American Liberator.
The U-boats all had Red Cross flags on the foredeck, which the airplane should have seen, and which he probably did see.
There's no part down in the Book of Rules of War what to do with a Red Cross submarine flying a Red Cross flag.
The 2 lifeboats that were at the front of the towers were blown up. It killed at least 100 people.
Finally, depth charges damaged the hull of U-156.
He told us that he was going to have to put us all back in the boats. It's too dangerous for me to keep you here. He told us that he had radioed a Vichy French cruiser which was in the area. It was called the Gloire, and that it would pick us up.
The submarine commander had the safety of his crew to think of, so he ordered the lifeboats all to clear off because he was going to submerge.
He wished us good luck and cut the boats free, and that was it, and left us.
He went down slowly so it didn't create a great deal of disturbance to the lifeboats. A very thoughtful German.
He had saved them from his own emergency dive. Now, when Harden landed on Ascension Island, he reported that he had sunk U-156. He had not. However, he received an air medal for the attack. Now, here is where it gets complicated, because U-156 survived. She surfaced after the attack and continued helping in the aftermath. The other submarines, the U-506 and U-507, refused orders to abandon the British and Polish survivors in retaliation. Instead, they kept pulling people out of the water. The Vichy French warships arrived days later. The cruiser Gloire, the sloops Annamite and Dumont d'Urville. They collected survivors from the submarines and lifeboats and transported them to Dakar. In the end, 1,113 people survived. Between 1,658 and 1,757 did not. Most of them Italian prisoners. Killed when the torpedoes struck. Killed in the chaos that followed. Or killed by the bombs of a plane that knew exactly what it was looking at. The U.S. military never investigated Harden or Richardson. But Admiral Dönitz, he issued an order that would follow him all the way to Nuremberg. On September 17, 1942, the day after the bombing, Dönitz issued what became known as the Laconia Order. German submarines were to cease all rescue operations. No more pulling survivors from the water. No food, no water, no lifeboats. The era of German humanitarian gestures at sea was over. Because once the B-24 attacked a submarine, flying a Red Cross, and towing lifeboats, Dönitz decided he could no longer risk his U-boat crews that way. The unintended result was that an American decision, made in about 5 minutes on a small island in the South Atlantic, ended naval rescue traditions that, let's face it, had existed for generations. And at Nuremberg in 1946, Allied prosecutors presented the Laconia Order as evidence of Dönitz's war crimes. The argument they made? That he had ordered his submarines to kill survivors. That this was a crime against humanity. It backfired. You see, when the full report emerged, when the court learned why the order had been issued, what had triggered it, what the American B-24 had done to a Red Cross convoy in broad daylight, the prosecution's case immediately collapsed. Dönitz was acquitted on that specific charge. And Richardson and Hardin and the decision made on Ascension Island were quietly forgotten. Hartenstein received the Knight's Cross for his rescue efforts. He later died in March 1943 when the U-156 was sunk by a U.S. patrol aircraft near Barbados. He had survived the bombs over his rescue convoy. However, he did not survive the war.
When I heard later on that the submarine had been depth charged in the West Indies, I was rather sorry in some ways, because he was a very nice man.
We need to look at what actually happened here. A German commander stopped in the middle of a war, flew the Red Cross, broadcast his position to the Allies, his enemy, and spent 3.5 days pulling British civilians out of the ocean. An American captain ordered that convoy bombed, received no punishment, and the pilot got a medal. And the order that resulted from that bombing was then used, unsuccessfully, to prosecute the man who tried to conduct the rescue. You see, history doesn't always sort itself out into clear categories of right and wrong. Sometimes the part of the story that matters most is the one nobody put in the report. And that's the part of this story we rarely talk about. Now, if you want more aviation stories like this one, the ones that history books leave out, then I hope you'll consider subscribing and staying right here, because we've got a lot more of them.